Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to the tie-in.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the tie-in. We're coming to you live from South by Southwest today on the patio of the Meta building. And we're here at Red ThreadX house, so thank you, Red ThreadX. And today we're speaking with Bradley Schurman, who is a demographic futurist, author, co-founder of New Rules Media, founder and CEO of Human Change. Now, this is going to be an interesting conversation.
I hope so.
Yeah, and let's dive in. Give us a little bit of background on who you are and what makes you tick.
So I study people. I study how people move. I study birth rates. I study human longevity, and I study migration. How it connects with climate is a relatively new practice because the planet is warming, whether people like to admit it or not, and that's impacting industries like insurance and real estate, and pushing us into what is effectively a new great migration of people moving away from high-risk zones to zones that might be lower risk in order to save money, not necessarily save the planet.
Right. So just to keep it at a high level for listeners who might not be following demographics, can you give us a little bit of background what exactly you're looking at and what the large trends are that we're looking at in demographics?
Yeah, so we really look at three things. We look at birth rates, the number of children people are having. We look at human longevity, which is how many years people are actually living. And then we look at migration. And migration falls into three categories. Internal migration, moving place to place, Pittsburgh to Poughkeepsie. We look at external immigration, people coming here from outside of the United States, perhaps coming here from Latin America. And then we look at emigration, Americans actually leaving the United States, going somewhere else. Across nearly all of these, they're basically governed by two things, risk and opportunity. So as it relates to climate, for the most part, people are leaving areas that are high risk now. They aren't necessarily, though, moving to places that are low risk, which is kind of ironic, because at the end of the day, people tend to chase affordability more than anything else. But we are starting to see some really significant trends around this right now. In fact, we're starting to see, especially the area around the Great Lakes, which is largely considered to be the safest climate zone in the United States right now, starting to market themselves as climate resilient cities, including Duluth, Minnesota, including Buffalo, New York. Now, whether or not people are picking up on what they're throwing down yet is TBD, but they are saying this is a safe space. Not only do we have great weather, mind you, cooler weather, they have incredible snowstorms during the winter, but we also have access to incredible resources, including 20% of the world's fresh water. Which is a pretty good marketing tactic, if you ask me.
No hurricanes?
No hurricane yet. Yet.
Oh, right.
But we don't know what the climate future is going to bring. We never would have anticipated a hurricane coming as far north as North Carolina, which it did this year. We can anticipate more of that in the future.
So just to kind of unpack that a little bit, with these trends, I mean, we've known sort of these risks from climate change for a while. Have people been attuned to them for a little while? Are we just now starting to feel the pinch, so we're attuned more and more? Like, how is that playing out?
Well, climate change is a very slow-moving event. It's like demographic change. It doesn't just happen overnight. Both of these events, both climate and demographics, I really treat as siblings because they were born during the Industrial Revolutions and they've effectively grown up together. What's interesting, though, is that we don't move until we feel the pinch. So what does that pinch mean? Well, for climate change, the pinch is really economic. So in South Florida, which is a perfect example, we're starting to see insurance rates jump absolutely out of proportion to the rest of the economy, 70% increase on average over the past 5 years. We're starting to see that there is significant devaluation in some coastal areas. And because of that, people are saying, I got to get out of here. I'm losing money.
Yeah.
And that's a big driver. With demographics, it's a little bit different. Demographics are driven by a multitude of things. Climate is part of it. Okay, we hear people talking today about how they don't want to have children. They don't want to bring them into a world that has a very uncertain climate future.
So I feel like climate change is kind of now a culture war kind of term.
It is.
And how are you seeing people, I mean, maybe they're not saying climate change, but they're feeling it, as you say, and who's feeling it? What does that mean for, and where are they moving? Is there any kind of key areas right
That's
now?
a lot to get
Okay.
after. Let's start with the first thing, is that climate change is a boogeyman in some
Okay.
circles.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
let's
this
just
is-
start with that.
Yeah.
And I think as a storyteller, the people who tell the best stories are often the best listeners.
Okay.
Because they actually sit down with people that might be have a different worldview than themselves. To get those inputs about what people are actually feeling. And I had this experience just last week. I was invited to South Dakota, major agricultural state, at the invitation of the governor to speak about the future of demographics for that state. And it was suggested to me, lightly, that climate change not be brought up in my presentation. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It is a ruby red state, but how do you talk about the world today without talking about climate change? And I realized that it's a language problem. It's really a language problem more than anything else. So I thought to myself, in preparing these remarks, how do I talk about this in a way that these folks will get?
Yeah.
And I classed the entire conversation in risk. What's your financial risk in the coming years? Now, for a state like South Dakota, their immediate opportunity financially is a longer growing season.
Yeah.
They'll be able to grow more soybeans, which is one of the largest crops in the state. But the wild weather events are really impacting crop production. So talking about it through a risk lens first, rather than climate change, which is really hard to understand. No one understands what an extra, 1.6 degrees Celsius means
And
to their daily
we're
lives.
going to blow past that.
We're already past it. But what they do understand is their crop yields.
Yes.
They do understand the cost of energy to cool their homes. They understand that for the past 5 years, the storms have been more strong and more damaging. They get that. So you have to flip the language. You essentially have to flip the script to give people something that they really can embrace. The themes are all the same. The outcomes are all the same, but how we communicate it changes. And you can really bring more people along that way to understanding and engaging in our future collective together.
Just a quick note on farmers, because farmers are some of the original environmentalists in a way. I mean, they're listening to the land. Yeah, right.
They still are.
So how is that, in your observation recently, how has that changed, or how has your message landed when you brought it back to sort of this risk around the environment?
It's really risk around money, because
right.
farmers operate on incredibly narrow margins. It is really hard to be a farmer, period. And that's why a lot of family farms have gone under and they've moved to more large-scale corporate farming. It doesn't make sense to be a family farmer in most of the country anymore, unless you're doing really like high-quality niche product, which is not what Americans buy. So these family farmers get it. They get the idea of regenerative farming. They're trying it more often now because there are people like Carbon Cowboys that are out there in the marketplace sharing with farmers that they can get more out of their land by doing regenerative farming. The land is just healthier. And they base a lot of this, which I think is such a cool way of framing it, around the way the native peoples treated the land. So they use cattle effectively like the buffalo used to roam on the plains. So all of a sudden the land becomes a lot healthier, a lot faster, because they're
biofertilizer.
It's effectively biofertilizer.
And like tilling up the soil and all the stuff, right?
But they're also gotten to a point, a lot of these farmers, many of them in the southern states, which are typically red, they've often gotten to the point now where these guys aren't buying as much not just fertilizer that they had to buy before, but also pesticides. They've embraced the bug as part of the ecosystem on their farms. Now, again, these are high quality, high producing farms for really niche products, but can this be applied to larger scale farming. I think that's TBD, but it's a really interesting story about how we can shift that narrative where people start to embrace our climate future.
How are we doing shifting the narrative? Like, are we doing a good job or not?
Well,
like, I hear no, but
I would say the answer is still a definitive no. And I blame us for it. I blame people on the coasts for it. We don't actively listen to folks in the middle.
Yeah.
And whenever I travel into the center of the country, into the heartland, which I make it a point of doing in my work, I am constantly shocked at how left behind they feel by us, how they feel ignored by us. And because the biggest businesses are located on the coast, because the media ecosystem is centered on the West and the East Coast, we often leave out these narratives about what's happening on the ground. So there are really good things happening, but we take this, I think, a very paternal kind of finger-wagging approach to people that live in the middle. And that's a problem for us going forward, because we have to have a common, we have to have a lingua franca around some of these issues if we're really going to get through them. And I argue, and I've been arguing for, my God, nearly a decade now, that we have entered not just a period of dramatic disruption, but it's a period of disruption that we haven't seen since like the 1920s and the 1930s, where everything changes. Shifts in climate, shifts in globalization, shifts in geopolitical power, shifts in communications and technology. All of that's changed, and for us it's really been over like 5 to 10 years versus like 20 to 30 years that they had at the onset of the last century. So it's a lot to digest, but we only get through it together.
What kind of solutions then are you starting to see, or are you working on and proposing this for your newsletter or for your next book?
So we are actively my co-founder and I, Marcia Stepanek, are actively seeking out these stories that are really driven locally, more and more so from the middle of the country, because, again, these people have a story to tell. Their stories aren't getting outside of their communities. So we'd like to bring them up to a national and global audience, and a year in, we believe we're starting to get there with a very, very small marketing budget, very small footprint, but something we anticipate to grow as we launch our podcast in the coming months. Because we're hoping, with a communications medium like that, we can distribute more widely domestically and internationally. But it all takes time, and time is fleeting right now. I do have a lot of hope for where we're going. I think hope is, something we need to have, especially in periods of great strife.
Mixed with some healthy fear.
Healthy fear, because fear is a great motivator. I mean, it is. But I do think that we will start to see alignment and consensus if we do adopt that lingua franca, that common language around some of our problems. It is a bit of a disjointed thing to talk about immigration these days, but I think it's an interesting highlight also from this recent trip to South Dakota, because their unemployment rate there is 1.9%.
Wow.
So that's half the national average. Okay? They are desperate for workers. I didn't hear a single person there express to me, from multiple industries, from concrete to farming and ranching to government, that they don't have a people problem. But it's not classed as an immigration issue.
Right.
They have a people problem.
Right.
We don't have enough bodies. And they don't care where the bodies come from. Because at the end of the day, it's about that pinch. That pinch right now for them economically is so strong, they'll take their workers any way they can get them.
Now, to that, they want workers. People are feeling the pinch locally and looking to move. Do you find there's enough information in the sort of general public to help them decide where to move?
As it relates to climate change, there is more than enough. There is more than enough information.
Job opportunities.
There is
or
more
whatever?
than enough information out there, and I do think that localities have done a really good job of marketing themselves as a great place to move. So I mentioned Buffalo before.
Yeah.
Buffalo has an urban homesteading program where you can go there and get like a $1 house in Buffalo, New York, to move there. That's one of the ways they're pulling people in.
Interesting.
There are communities across the country. Tulsa, Oklahoma, for example, gives you $1,000 to move there as a worker because they need more people there. As it relates to climate and climate resilience, that's where things get a little bit more amorphous.
Yeah.
People don't necessarily know where to go to get the best data.
Yeah.
Like, as your average American, hey, where are you getting your data from? They'll give you this blank stare. My data for
Social
what?
media.
And there just aren't enough people, I think, in social media talking about this.
Yeah, okay.
There aren't influencers in climate migration.
Interesting.
And one of those areas is in urban areas, New York City, for example. My own city of Washington, D.C., where as the cities were built, in the early 1900s, they built over existing water. They built over rivers, they built over creeks,
everywhere.
they built over wetlands.
Yeah.
So it looks dry
Yeah.
to look at it, but
Yeah.
when it rains, it floods, and it floods first. So you can have a property that sits right on the banks of the Hudson River that will never ever flood.
Yeah.
But you can have a property 6 blocks in, 7 blocks in that will flood every time the rain falls. So this is really good data for consumers to use, but they have to know it's there.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure it's gotten to them yet that it is there. Yeah. But again, the market is pushing people in a way because of increased insurance costs, because of decreased valuation in properties, to look at this more critically. But again, and I hate to kind of beat this one over the head, Americans are still driven primarily by cost and affordability. So even though this migration has started, moving out of places like Florida into more northern locales, people tend to move from one high-risk area to another. So they might be leaving flood risk in Florida, but they might be moving to heat wave risk in Arizona.
Yeah.
Or wildfire risk in the Pacific Northwest.
Because of affordability. Mostly.
Affordability.
And then,
and of course, Americans love to have space.
Yeah.
We love sprawl. It is kind of in our DNA. And as housing prices, specifically in urban areas, has really just shot up beyond belief. The average cost of a house in this country jumped from around $50,000 in 2019 to over $100,000 last year. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
That kind of price increase. People are desperate to get their foot on the ladder of the American dream.
Yeah.
And there is a demographics piece that actually folds into this, believe it or not. In 1985, just 40 years ago, the average American took about 2.5 years to save up for their first home. Okay. Today it's about 7 to 9 years.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
If you have a good job, dual income.
If you're lucky. And it's not just that. It's also that because of this delay, it's also increased the average age of a home buyer.
Yeah.
So in 1985, it was 29. Today, it's 38. So this pushes into all these other categories, and people are desperate to be part of that American dream, and they're willing to move to get it.
Yeah. Just one thing I want to touch on. Do you feel that it's actually going to be the insurance companies that are going to drive climate change adaptation? Or is that fair to say, or is it something deeper than that?
100%. The market is driving it, whether it's the real estate market or the insurance market. The market is driving it, and this is a bit counterintuitive to the way we think policy making works. We think policy making is driven by government, and to a large degree it still is. But this is a de facto policy making exercise, if we can call it that, where people are starting to think not just about migration but also mitigation. So, we've got some good friends who are down in South Beach, and we saw them at Art Basel in December, and they were just thrilled that they had finished a project on their condo. They had replaced the windows.
Right.
And he said, we are saving $5,000 a year now on our insurance because the windows that we have installed are hurricane-proof windows.
Okay.
So the market is driving change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The market will drive change faster for people who have the ability to make change.
Yeah.
So high net worth individuals. And this is where the real split happens, okay? High net worth, super high net worth individuals can effectively weather the storm.
Yeah.
If they have a bad hurricane, if they have a bad fire, they can rebuild. We're going to see this across LA.
Yeah.
We're going to see these high net worth individuals put back up homes immediately.
Yeah.
The homes they're going to put up, though, are going to be homes that really consider fire going forward. So they're going to be using more concrete than wood to build. They're going to be using glass that is higher tempered for higher temperatures. And they're going to have more setback from the vegetation on their property to avoid fire risk going forward. And that will insulate them to some degree around fire insurance. So they'll get a benefit back from their insurance companies. Biggest issue right now is that insurance companies are abandoning people.
Yeah. Well, it's falling on the government, and even the governments, once they abandon the people.
Yeah, so the governments, many governments have set up these insurances that are insurances of last resort. It's a bit like the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. Like, we have it here just in case these companies default. These insurances of last resort never have enough money in them.
Okay.
So when you have an LA wildfire event, and a lot of people are already in this insurance product because they can't get market-based insurance, it's immediately depleted. So if you are in a product like this, you are effectively without insurance if a major event happens.
Yeah.
You know, my biggest concern for the future is that, not that we don't have these ultra-wealthy people that can rebuild, they're going to be fine. They're always fine. They're always fine. It's the people that fall in the middle and below, people that are on fixed income, whether that be public assistance, for low income, or they're on a fixed income in retirement, they don't have the same ability to be flexible. The people in the middle, though, the middle class is getting squeezed once again here. Some of them are able to move, honestly though, only if they have the right information at their fingertips. And they are moving. We're starting to see them move into moving to higher ground effectively. But the people that are on the lower end can't move.
Yeah.
And what that does, and this is a huge risk for communities, is if you lose your middle, these are people that are working, they're actively engaged, they're paying taxes, they're super active consumers.
Yeah.
If you lose those people, there's an immediate waterfall event, like kind of a trickle-down effect that happens within these communities because you erode your tax base. So you can't pay for fundamental services like your hospitals, your roads, like future mitigation plans for
public schools, any of that.
But even
right?
for like climate resilience, you can't build then without these things there.
Yeah.
And when these areas lose population, they can go into a demographic spiral, and it's bad because they really can never recover after that.
So in this demographic spiral, what's the likelihood of internal or community conflict,
huge.
uprising,
Huge.
protests, whatever that looks like,
Huge.
right?
Huge.
Yeah.
The question isn't if, it's when that happens. And the elements are lining up for some degree of civic unrest / revolution, not to be too hyperbolic here,
but
because of the confluence of all of these things coming together.
Yeah.
And you have to look for signals in the noise right now to figure out what we should be paying attention to, and to look at public anger and public sentiment towards the way of the world. I think you just have to take a look at the killing of the United Healthcare CEO last fall. Luigi Mangione has been lionized. That would have never happened 10 years ago. So people are looking for heroes now. They're looking for, and that never happens this way. They're not Robin Hood type individuals that just pop up out of nowhere. But people are looking for that hero, even if it's an anti-hero, to step in and right the wrongs of the system. We can't right climate change. That script has already been written at this point.
Yeah.
What we can do is help people mitigate the risk. We can help people migrate to places that might be safer. And we can, potentially chart a future where we're using less and less energy that's contributing to this kind of mess that we're in. It was interesting. I just sat on this really phenomenal presentation this morning, and the presenter, an architect out of New York City, showed two maps. One was pollution production, and one was population growth. And where population is declining in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Europe, the pollution levels are through the roof, absolutely through the roof. But where the population's actually growing in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's growing at a pretty exponential rate.
Yeah.
Here we have, 1.6 birth rate. We need 2.1 to maintain the population. Sub-Saharan Africa, it's like 7 or 8, which is pretty astonishing to have 7 babies as a person. But he said something that blew my mind. He said, there are futurists that predict that Africa, the continent, will be the first net zero continent.
Wow.
Because they think about energy use and consumption and pollution differently, in part because of the world that we're in today.
Yeah.
Blew my mind.
They don't have to start from being energy hogs to going down.
Correct.
They can
Correct. And this is why places that are developing leapfrog us in certain areas, like mobile technology.
Absolutely.
Africa is light years ahead of us when it comes to mobile technologies.
I've always wondered, in areas that are extremely warm and hot, sunny, like we should be retrofitting them instead of just heat pumps. It should be like solar thermal air conditioning, or we really, every home in southern US should be retrofitted so that when the sun shines more, the home is cooler.
Correct.
This should be a simple.
Correct. Well, it's also we're building properties that don't belong where they are. Like this building, most of the buildings in downtown Austin are these glass structures. That's not the right thing to have in a warming climate. It doesn't make sense. They're not necessarily energy efficient. They reflect the sun back out, which heats the place even more. You take a look at the areas along the Mediterranean that have been there for thousands of years now. What do they look like?
White
Low
cement.
density, white cement. And those properties stay cool even in the hottest days of summer because of that approach to building that is based on the environment, not based on what we want to see.
We figured this out. Hundreds of thousands of
We
years
figured this out. Civilization figured this out. Even the Romans, when they built their homes, they built them with kind of cooling in mind.
Yeah.
Center open courtyards, flowing space. India, there's still plenty of places that are using effectively nature's air conditioning, water running over clay. We can do it. We're choosing not to because we love to have the room set at that perfectly cool 68 degrees.
Well, yeah, so this is, when you mentioned it earlier, the question popped into my mind, and I feel like it's a bit controversial, so I'll just, it's simple, but I feel like there's some, there are feelings around this by people. With what you just said, and how we like certain things and how we want to live certain ways and these sorts of things, yet all of these changes happening, do we need to reconsider what the American dream is?
We are reconsidering what the American dream is.
Okay.
It's being forced upon us.
Okay.
The American dream in the mid-century was that you were married, you had 2 kids and a home by 25.
We don't
many
do that.
25-years that are married and have a home and 2 kids anymore.
We don't do that now.
We don't do that
But yet
now.
people hold on to this idea.
Yeah,
How do we
It is
change
in
that?
constant evolution, the American dream.
Okay.
And that, that home at the end of the cul-de-sac with the 2 kids. It's just not there anymore. We need to rethink, I think, in general, how we live. I think we need to take a cue from kind of middle density places that we love to visit. Like, how many of us pick up and go to Europe every summer because we love the scale? Walkable, easy to get around. Even in cities like Paris that get quite hot in the summertime now, a fraction of the people actually use air conditioning. They can get through it. But here, though, we love our comforts. And there's a limit to how much energy we're going to be able to produce in theory. And there's going to be a limit to how much, there's never we have an insatiable appetite, so there's no end to how much we want to consume. But there is an end potentially to how much we can produce. So that's why there's a big push right now amongst people like Bill Gates, for example, to build nuclear reactors because we need more energy. Things to look out for, I think, as we look at sustainability going forward, is certainly these companies that are engaging in artificial intelligence, building these data centers.
Yes.
It's kind of akin well, you'll remember this, to when the big water companies started moving into small towns and drilling into the ground to take the water, to package up, to send out for
Privatize
sale.
it,
Like,
yes.
it kind of, oh my God, we can sell water in a bottle? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
They've gobbled up all the resources. It's a big issue in Michigan right now. The same issue is happening now around energy with these data centers. They come in, they offer the promise of big jobs in construction and maintenance. It's a bit of a pig in the poke. They come in, they build these things that have a huge footprint, take up an incredible amount of energy, put a strain on local resources, and barely anyone works at them.
Yeah.
So they're kind of net takers from these areas. And they keep opening them in places that probably shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Like hotter places.
And some geothermal.
So why does that? So what then are the barrier? Like, where's the friction, or where would be the friction to opening in areas? Is it just because, like, why would we do that? Are there risk assessments that haven't been considered?
America's a very hyper-fragmented country, like in terms of governance.
Yeah.
You've got federal jurisdiction, you've got state jurisdiction, you've got county jurisdiction, you've got local jurisdiction, and that's why business has the upper hand in negotiating, because business is multi-state, sometimes multi-nation. They can come in and basically bid local jurisdiction after local jurisdiction. It's easy to split people up that way when they see the prospect of a tax-paying entity coming in, and we're talking in some cases literally town to town. They can make this fight happen and get the best deal possible. So again, we're motivated by money first here,
Always.
which is a real quandary, and I think that's where you start pivoting the conversation is, how do you make it about money and make people understand the financial implications of this? But also people have to understand the short-term financial implications of this, not the long-term. Like, I can't say to somebody, I can project that you're going to lose 50% of your home's value in 20 years. They will never understand that.
Right.
What does it mean for me in the next 2 to 5?
Right.
And even then, you're kind of stretching on the timeline for most people.
Interesting.
People are kind of short-term thinkers.
Yeah.
And it is built into our DNA from day one. Our number one mode is survival. So we are not designed, our fundamental design is not to think long term.
Right.
It's to think about how do we get through the day. So even though we've had all of these advancements over the past century plus, we are still not caught up to our kind of biological programming. So we're thinking about how to get the next meal. That's still kind of built in there, because 100 and some years ago, when my grandfather was a teenager, he wasn't sure if he was going to get his next meal.
Yeah.
100 years ago, people didn't have hot showers. Like, they were just wondering when they could get clean.
Yeah.
Like, where they could toilet. Indoor plumbing was just something we didn't have. So all of these modern conveniences, I wouldn't argue that they've made us lazy, but our brains haven't caught up to the fact that we have this license now to think long term.
Yeah.
We're still thinking short term.
Right, but you can't expect the individual to be wholly responsible for that. This is the public good. There has to be a system that's in place for that.
This is where I think that where government can really step in is help provide the guidance people need to get us to that next level. And government has stepped in to some degree. The problem is we live in a hyper-divisive time. And this is not just in the United States, this is worldwide, where we are fighting against each other for some reason. There's an argument made by an author who wrote this book called The Fourth Turning. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before, but he argues that the United States runs in effectively 80-year cycles, and there are 4 turnings to that cycle. We are in the 4th turning now, and this is a period of hyper collapse, hyper challenges, hyper conflict, and out of this comes, in theory, a period of renewment, of kind of almost a joyous period for the country to come together and focus on things collectively. The last end of the 4th turning was the end of the Second World War. And coming into the late 1940s, early 1950s, early 1960s, that was really considered the golden age of America. So if you believe what these authors write, and man, does it feel like that, because the end of the previous 4th turning was the end of the Civil War. It starts to feel like this is a real pattern here. all of this conflict is starting to get to a point where we might in fact be coming out of it into something good. I do think in speaking with people, especially in the middle of the country, they know that things are wrong too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody knows.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows. We live, though, in different media echo chambers right now.
Yeah.
And because of that, this consensus, again, around language is missing.
Yeah.
But also in how we frame things that are risk. Like, people might see immigrants as higher risk than climate. Immigrants come in part because of climate. So
Sure.
you have to look at these things, I think, more intersectionally. I know that's a dirty word now, too. But we used to be able just to say, okay, climate's this, demographics are this. We used to be, very much put things in their columns.
Yeah.
We'll deal with that. Now you have to look at all of them together.
Sure.
You can't look at one without the other. You can't look at immigration without considering climate. You can't consider climate and immigration without thinking about demographics. You can't consider all three without thinking about pricing for things like labor. All of this stuff is so interconnected now. And that's what we're trying to do at New Rules, is really help people make sense of all this madness, all this stuff that's going around us right now, so that they can really chart a course to greater resilience and really leading as we come out of this, hopefully in a couple years.
I love that. One thing here at, that Zena and I work on is sustainability and entertainment. And have you done any thinking around how we could leverage entertainment to sort of like project some of these consensus-driven messages, either in front of the camera or behind the camera?
Yeah, I mean, I think that science fiction is already starting to take us there, filmmaking in particular, providing us some really interesting views of what the future could be, a dystopian future could be. I think Ready Player One is kind of a perfect example of that, where it's effectively, it looks like the environment is collapsed around them, yet people seem kind of sanguine in their experience of life because technology keeps them kind of escaped from what reality is. I think illustrating those dystopian futures is really helpful. There was a great show that was on Apple TV earlier this year, and the name escapes me, but it's basically you go into a box, this guy can do different timelines. It shows alternate worlds, but it shows alternate futures and what they could be. I think more people could be exposed through entertainment to alternate futures, where perhaps the climate does collapse and we become climate refugees ourselves. I think that's an interesting storyline to pull on. Gamification is still a big winner across the board. How you integrate climate and sustainability into gaming, I'll leave that to the gaming experts. Yeah. But I do know that people still glom on to games and how they can use them. But I think with entertainment, if you look at it broadly, it includes some news media into that, especially opinion, is really telling more of these stories that, and that's what we're trying to do, really get to these stories that are unique, that are actionable, that can help people get to that next level. And for, your average Joe to say, you know what, I can do that in my community too. Everyday conservation is hard for people to wrap their heads around, and it's really hard to, I think, embrace what those little changes are actually going to do to solve for the bigger problems.
Right.
So how can we, and I think how can entertainment start explaining to people what those do?
Yes.
My mom has effectively gamified her garbage separation at home.
Nice.
It's weird, but it's become this thing where they are so, she in particular, my father too, are so interested in how much they can recycle and how much they can compost. That it's kind of a game to see how low the levels in the actual garbage can be now. There's also, I think, again, through an entertainment lens, a way to incentivize people for doing that.
Sure. Whether
that's financial incentives in some sort, discounts, etc. Those can probably be built in too. But, entertainment's a business, so there's got to be some way to earn off of this too, and perhaps that's why more hasn't been done yet. is that there isn't that overriding economic win for producers to get behind this and say, we're going to sell a great product talking about sustainability.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound so sexy.
Reflect life as we're feeling it out there, and as you're describing through your work and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So definitely more to be done there.
I also think, people know there's a problem. We can agree. Like, you talk to everybody knows there's a problem. Really what we need to see is, what are solutions to get us out of it?
Yeah.
Like, that's the hopeful future, but also, like, what pathways can we take to pull ourselves out of the place that we're in? Mm-hmm. And if we can't, how do we mitigate what's happening as a result?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We ask all our guests this question because we're trying to figure this all out. And you talk about new rules, so I'm curious to get your take on this. If you were to create a new playbook of guiding principles in your line of work, what would be first on your list?
Number one right now would be breaking down regulation around housing in this country.
Okay.
I think that is the single greatest issue to our demographic, climate, and future prospects.
Okay.
Because housing is too expensive. We are building more and more in the suburbs, which require more and more people to use cars, and they don't protect the environment at all.
No, we got to move on.
I think that, and this is, and I will do a little finger wagging here from the liberal side of the country. Liberals are really bad at this. Like NIMBYism is really getting in the way of us achieving high success around all of these metrics.
Kind of shooting ourselves in the foot here.
We are. Because we say, there's too many people living in cities now. Yeah. Well, there aren't too many people living in cities now. The reality is there's plenty of room for more people to live here, especially if we build the right kind of housing. Right. We create the right kind of communities. I think we should have an aspirational goal of getting a certain percentage of people out of cars. That should be one of our top goals. After housing, which is tied to this, a certain percentage of people out of cars. And I don't care if the car runs on petroleum products or is a hybrid or is electric. The car's the problem.
Yes, it is.
And I think in the mid-century, certainly in the mid-century, 100%, the car was seen as this instrument of freedom. And the car is not that anymore. The car is an instrument of servitude. It costs an incredible amount to own a car now. Not just the ownership of that vehicle, but to fill it up, to repair it, etc. You can't just fix your own car anymore because it's a computer. The car is a big problem. Cities, especially cities that are built in kind of medium density around community and neighborhood, that's what we need to be spending our time and our energy on, and really, really changing the way we do regulation. And we can't do that when NIMBYism is the mode of the day. We just can't do it.
Oh, Bradley, this has been wonderful.
Great.
It's been a great conversation.
Awesome.
We'll end it on that. Maybe you can
blow away.
maybe you can tell our listeners where to find you and how to get a hold of your various projects and newsletters.
Yeah, sure. So you can find us at behumanchange.com. newrulesmedia.com, and if you want to go straight to the Substack, it's newrulesmedia.substack.com. It's free to join for now, and our podcast will be out in the coming months.
Excellent.
Amazing.
Great.
Thank you. Have a good time here in
Thank
South by
you.
Southwest.
You too.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Our producer is Colin Miller.